¿Vale? Let's go.
Equipment yellow. If they want to, if design wanted to expose that as an attribute to our matchmaker, that we could do that. We're providing the flexibility for game design to be able to make cool experiences for the players.
Puede ser que hablen de cosas interesantes este vídeo, ¿eh? Vamos a estar atentos por si cae algo interesante.
Talking about service improvements. My
Mejoras
name
de
is
servicio.
Kyle Richter. I am the software development manager over the Azov backend team. We have Matthew Wu, who's an engineer on the services team. Kenny Doyle, who is also an engineer on the services team. And as you all have seen before, Quinn Carter, QA engineer for the backend teams. So last time, guys, we talked about, kind of went through a rundown of where services came from and how we were approaching services moving forward. And we did touch on matchmaking a little bit, but I figured we could really kind of dive in deeper here, kind of see where cross-world OPR landed and the data that we got from that, and start moving into, okay, well, how are we taking what we learned from that and expanding it and building it into what we're building for the future. So Matt, you were pretty instrumental in the initial implementation of cross-world OPR. What was the target there, and how did we build that cross-world OPR matchmaking system? And then we can kind of take that from there and go into how we've approached V2.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question.
La versión 2
our
ha dicho,
first version for cross-world matchmaking was to get something in front of the players and see if this is
Subirle la velocidad,
a beneficial feature for you guys. And OPR is a very fun activity to play together, and we know that it's difficult to find a group of 40 players to play with inside a single world, and wanted people to be able to experience that more, and so turning that into a cross-world feature. And when I was designing it, we were designing it to launch us forward into more capabilities for cross-world with that in mind. And so I think we've seen success with cross-world matchmaking and just continuing to move forward with that.
Absolutely. And in our initial pass on matchmaking, we were just trying to get some of the infrastructure in place, right, and build something that we could test against. And so OPR is a good game mode for that, right, because it allows us to just fill teams kind of evenly, right? But that kind of leads us into the next side is once we've got that kind of baseline in place, now it becomes, okay, well, how do we start to form better matches, right, or more complex matches? And Kenny, I figured you could talk a little bit about where we're kind of going moving forward with our version 2 of matchmaking.
Interesante.
Yeah,
Versión
absolutely.
2.
Well, one thing, it's been great to see the player feedback around OPR. So, you know, that people are able to find matches so much faster now. So I think it's really exciting to think about how we're going to take that forward and, yeah, with the matchmaking service expanded out. And yeah, so going forward, looking at bringing a rules engine into our matchmaking service. So moving beyond the kind of OPR team filler technology and expanding out based on player attributes, group attributes, using those to get players into matches quickly, but that are either say more relevant to their interests or have good team composition for taking on a particular challenge.
Yeah, and I know we spent quite a lot of time already building out this new system. We've got a number of rules that we're kind of experimenting with, and just being able to do things like, like we've talked about before, like role compositions and doing interesting things with that, I think is a massive added benefit to players. Quinn, we talked last time that like the process of testing the initial matchmaking system was already hard enough, right? And this system is quite a bit more complex. So what are we looking at when we go into starting to test some of this stuff as we get closer to launch?
Well, I mean, like when we first went to the matchmaking testing on that, we first had to figure out, okay, where are the bounds? Like, what can we test with? Like, are we actually able to see the right number of players hitting the match? Do we have the tools to fill up as expected, and then follow up with some of the other features like the backfill, making certain that players are able to get into the match after it started, and when it ends, can players get to the next match and so forth? And then not to mention all that, just tracking where they are in that process. In the beginning, until we actually understood exactly how they were landing, it was a definite challenge understanding like where they needed to be for us to track them to know what we were looking for the success of the actual matchmaking system. Much like we found a few problems in the earlier days of it. So it's definitely a lot more.
Hablando
definitely had trouble at that point.
The nuevo matchmaking
one thing that we've been working on in the second iteration of matchmaking is to improve our automated testing, which Kenny has really helped with adding in into our unit tests, our integration tests, and just to be able to run those every single time we're making changes, so that QA is not like, oh, this thing's now broken all of a sudden, which we did have difficulty with.
Absolutely. I mean, there were several play tests, right, where just getting into a reasonable state to test through some of our working paths was difficult.
Yeah. Now we got the kind of sanity checks baked in. in, and even adding some more of the esoteric test cases. Yeah, just make sure that we're in a good state. And really comes down to not wasting Quinn's time. Nobody wants to do that, and we want to, optimize around that as much as we can.
Absolutely. So for people that may not be as familiar with some of the terms, right, like rules-based system, what is, in terms of what players might think about, what is this really? What kind of thing can we associate to players for understanding what a rules-based matchmaking system might do?
Sure. Yeah. So the main thing is it comes down to, let's say, configuration and providing our game designers with the tools that they need to be able to describe these different game modes with our rules engine. So if we wanted a game mode with varying team size, varying composition, could be other attributes as well, if we wanted to say.
Vale, están hablando de, llegado a cierto punto, meter diferentes modalidades, vaya, ¿no?
Players who have dyed all of their equipment yellow. If design wanted to expose that as an attribute to our matchmaker and have us use that and form matches around all these players who had dyed their outfits, that we could do that. We're providing the flexibility for game design to be able to make cool experiences for the players.
Vale,
now that's really interesting to think about, because sometimes I know that players have brought up that it seems like sometimes it's slow for us to get around.
Pero es complicado, yo creo, hacer eso bien.
And one of the major benefits here is that these things can kind of be modified on the fly, right? And as designers see what is forming good matches and what isn't, right?
Now, if I can talk about something that Matt's been working on, with standing up our rules control plane, it's exactly that, so that designers could be able to submit the rules changes kind of out of band or independently of a new build or a new service deployment, and more instantaneously have those new rules in place for matches. And I think actually too for QA could be simpler in that near soon to be reality to have these, like, let's say maybe like a 2v2 OPR mode for a particular test, and then be able to test it as legitimate matchmaking and go through the full legitimate flow, but without having to use like a sideband way of starting the match early, like to actually go through the full matchmaking experience.
Yeah, I think the big benefit is that by building a system like this, we get to change data, right, as opposed to having to change code.
Lo van a hacer,
want to be modified, and that is
Van a meter 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, y estoy convencido que van a meter 5 versus 5 también, ¿eh? Seguro que lo van a meter.
That's a big area that
Y de ahí lo siguiente ya es 50 versus 50, que será el modo guerra. El modo guerra, que va a llegar, seguro. Por eso os digo, de que se vienen cositas, se vienen cositas.
That we want to target moving forward as we extend and expand our basis for how we build games, right, is to make sure that we're building systems that are extensible and don't require as much dedicated engineer time to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think there's so many people on the team who have worked on matchmaking systems in different games, and pretty much every single one of them is like, we're not going to get the rules right the first time, and so we need that ability to iterate. Yeah, so Pal has been good at pushing this.
Appreciate that. For sure. We've had a couple wins in some of these areas. Quinn, it sounded like you were going to say something?
Well, probably a question that might pop up with the community in general, and this is something that's kind of digging in my mind, especially as you describe it, is with the way that we're structuring the rule system and all that, one aspect that people might either misconstrue or have in the forefront of mind from other games would be, is this going to be similar to skill-based matchmaking of any sort? And is that going to deride our ability to provide adequate games for people to have both fun but also the challenge? But of course, I imagine that's more of the gameplay side, not necessarily our service side.
Yeah, for us, it's really about just providing the technology that allows game teams to do these types of things, right? And so that's one of the benefits of these rules-based matchmaking systems, is that game engineers, game teams, or designers can take these tools and then use them in creative ways, right, to do different things. That does actually bring up a point, though, because our community question last time was around what players would like to see as cross-world experiences. And a lot of players, I noticed, that we're bringing up expeditions and arenas, which we do have on our roadmap, and is currently targeted at Season 4. But it does bring up an interesting idea of what types of things can we build. So we're targeting cross-world expeditions and arenas coming up very soon. But just having this technology here allows us to do some really neat things in the future. And instead of having just a system built for exactly what we need, it does allow us to expose some functionality that they can use in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the attributes that I was discussing earlier, it's like, who's to say what design chooses for those attributes and to feed into our service? But
yeah, don't blame services then.
No, but we're definitely on that approach, right? Where it's like, yeah, we have that flexibility. So if skill became a consideration, that's something that our service could take into account.
Yeah, absolutely. So matchmaking is an interesting one. We talked quite a bit about inventory service last time, and some of the approaches that we're taking there to kind of along the same lines, kind of expose these same types of extensible functionalities. One of the other things that I've noticed players really talking about a lot has been like queue times around releases and things like that, right? And we're also working on a set of improvements right now related to some of those things, like players being stuck in really long queue times, allowing them to potentially like do some transfers for free or something like that to get them into a different state to distribute that player base a little bit. I know none of you guys distribute that like do of queue times around releases and things like that, right? And we're also
No sé,
working on a
mejoras
set
este
of,
momento relacionadas con alguna de estas
improvements
cosas.
right now related to some of those things, like players being stuck in really long queue times, allowing them to potentially like do some transfers for free or something like that to get them into a different state to distribute that player base a little bit.
¿Para qué? ¿Para colas grandes? Ah, vale, lo de los transfers, vale, para meter transferencias gratuitas, vale, pero eso no tiene nada que ver con el tema de los VGs, eso es lo que van a meter,
I
sí,
know
sí, sí.
none of you guys have worked specifically on that, but
Ahora
we've been
contesto,
involved in some
gente.
conversations. So what do you guys think about some of those areas that we're making improvements in?
Well, I think it's really cool, just like sort of the broad range of ideas that's being considered to really improve the player experience around these queue times. And, if that's in terms of being able to open up more worlds as set of worlds starts to fill up, or to be able to offer players the ability to transfer for free. I think it's awesome that we're thinking of our players in that way and giving them kind of the ability
Pues
to...
sí, ya era hora, la verdad, de que
Absolutely.
hicierais
I know
eso.
we've talked about a number of ways to accomplish that, but it can be a somewhat hard problem to solve, right?
Yeah, like you said, we've thought about a lot of different solutions, some that are bigger, some that are more feasible. And it's interesting because, from the very beginning, we've had ideas on how to solve this problem, and just cool to see us trying different things.
Absolutely.
I think one of the challenges around that, or like one of the interesting problems, is just rethinking how we think of like how active a particular world is, and kind of going beyond just CCU, like how many players are actually like active and in that world at that time, versus like historically how popular has this world been, and does that factor into our thinking? And like just because a world that has been very popular has a lower count of players at this time, maybe it still makes sense to open up worlds, because we know peak hours do come back. It's like a cycle here, so anticipating around that.
Yeah, we've also had several different attempts along the way or not attempts, but like market improvements, right? Like we introduced not too long ago the ability for this like latent character idea, right? Where if a player has been inactive for a certain period of time, we added some functionality that allows them to select a new world when they come back, right? To again help kind of distribute some of this. And there are other examples too. Last time we talked a little bit about cross-world transfers and some of these other mechanisms. We have had some reports recently of latent character weirdness though that we're currently working on. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Going with a lot of live player
esto,
reports, a few players come into the fold as we run through the game service, and they're hitting up certain cases that obviously we can't really account for in some odd cases. Like for example, the problem we had was that depending on the world state, like the world getting more popular over time, or peaks of value or ebbs and flows of the player population, when we end up finding a point where the world has too many players and want to cut it off, unfortunately there's some times where, hey, maybe a returning player comes in, here's that latent player, they come in, they want to join back in, they don't want to move again. That's the problem that we now came across, where it's like, hey, we didn't necessarily think about this at the time. And partly shame on us, but again, there's one of those like common cases for QA or in development as a whole, just to figure out, hey, what's all the cases we can figure out at this time without getting too lost in the sauce, or again, trying to not lose out what we're trying to resolve.
And we had added some world locking functionality, like automatic world locking, to get around some of those things that we talked about. But one of the downfalls to it is it's very like rigid, right? It hits a certain point and then it just automatically locks the world. And kind of to what you were talking.
Creo que se enrollan demasiado en lo mismo. O sea, al final y al cabo han hablado de dos cosas. Que han hablado acerca de los nuevos potenciales modos que pueden hacer por el nuevo sistema que han implementado. Que van a implementar. Y el tema de los free transfers. O sea, tampoco es nada así.
So the last time we asked what were some of the things that we'd like to see coming up, and again, you guys asked about things like cross-world expeditions, cross-world arenas, wars,
Vale.
things like that. But a big question that comes into
¿He
following.
hecho crossworld de guerras?
But a big question that
Estaría
comes
guapo
into
eso.
following that would be, what were some of the pain points on finding groups for that content, or without cross-world, as well as what would you like to see as other means to help
Pero claro,
facilitate
no tiene mucho sentido porque no vas a pillar el territorio de otro servidor. No tiene mucho sentido pillar el territorio de otro servidor. Si hubiesen canales, pues a lo mejor sí. Pero tampoco tendría mucho sentido, la verdad. A no ser que hablemos de un modo. ¿Es posible que se les haya escapado?
grouping and social aspects for playing the game. So give us a note or a comment on that if you can.
Absolutely. And as always, if you like the video, please subscribe. Helps with the algorithms. And
Vale, en el siguiente Fortune de Aeternum, a ver. Community Q&A, El siguiente es Community Q&A. Por favor, que no sea durante esta semana, que sea la semana que viene cuando vuelva, por favor, a ser posible, gracias. Bueno, pues eso ha sido el vídeo. Ha sido interesante hablar, o sea, que escucharles hablar acerca del tema de potenciales nuevos modos, de como 2 vs 2, 1 vs 1, que es obvio que tienen que llegar, y yo creo que va a ser lo siguiente que van a anunciar en el siguiente roadmap, que eso lo veremos a final de año. Así que poquito más por ahí.